The rain hammered against the glass walls of the mansion overlooking Lake Union, turning the city lights of Seattle into a trembling watercolor. Inside, silence stretched across the $10 million home, like a wound that refused to close. Elias Ward sat alone on the edge of his bed, the glow from a single brass lamp, outlining the sharp planes of his face, the dark crescents beneath his eyes, and the hollowness that had settled in the years since the accident. The storm outside was loud, yet it was the faint ticking of the clock that tormented him most. On the nightstand lay 3 bottles, one for sleep, one for energy, one for what his doctor called the future. He had built a company that made machines capable of reading a heartbeat before it faltered, yet his own heart had forgotten how to want. His reflection in the mirror was almost unrecognizable. An empire in human form, exhausted, estranged from itself. He reached for the blue label bottle, hands trembling, and swallowed 2 capsules without checking. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his chest tightened, his pulse raced, and a heat began to crawl under his skin. The world tilted. The storm outside blurred into the pounding of his veins. He pressed his palms to his temples, tried to breathe, but his thoughts tangled into flashes of memory. Headlights glass a scream that had never left him. He stumbled to the mirror again, gripping the sink. The face staring back was the same one that had watched his fiancée die 3 years ago. He wanted to wipe it away. Instead, he whispered to the empty room, barely a breath, "Please, I need to make love. Don't move." The words startled even him. Strange and desperate a confession, torn from somewhere between mind and muscle. He sank to the floor, shaking. In the hallway beyond, a soft creak followed the sound of feet that did not belong to him. Lila Moreno had come to bring him his nightly tea. She paused when she heard the words, unsure if they were meant for someone alive or someone lost. Lila was 27, a live-in housekeeper, with the posture of someone who had once worn scrubs. Before her mother's medical bills drowned her, she had been a nurse. She had seen bodies fail, but never watched a soul give up. The man she worked for never smiled, never spoke more than a polite thank you. At night, his voice cracked like glass. She hesitated outside the door, fingers brushing the tray of tea, debating whether to leave it by the threshold or step inside. The thunder rolled again, shaking the window panes, and she imagined him alone behind that door, suffocating on his own silence. She knocked once softly. Mr. Ward, no answer. She turned the handle. The room was dim, except for the trembling lamplight. Elias sat on the floor, back against the bed, eyes unfocused, sweat beading on his forehead. The pill bottle lay open beside him, labels blurred by the spill of water from an overturned glass. "Mr. Ward, are you all right?" she asked, setting the tray down. His gaze lifted toward her as if she were a hallucination. "I took the wrong medicine," he said, voice rough, ashamed. "My body, it's reacting. I can't control it." Lila crouched beside him, keeping her distance but letting her voice steady the air. "You're not in danger, but you need to breathe. Focus on me." His breath came in ragged bursts, his hands clawing at the fabric of his shirt. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he murmured, eyes glistening. "I just feel everything. Too much." She reached for a towel, wiped the sweat from his temple. The touch made him freeze. No one had touched him in years, without a contract, without expectation. He looked at her hand as if it were a miracle or a weapon. "You should go," he said. "Please." "You're not dangerous, sir," she whispered. "You're just human." The words cut through the static in his mind. Human. He had forgotten what that felt like. A tremor passed through him, part fear, part relief. The heat that flooded his veins began to ebb, leaving only exhaustion in its wake. She moved to the nightstand, poured a glass of water, and pressed it into his hand. "Drink," she said. He obeyed, the tremor of the glass betraying him. A single tear slipped from the corner of his eye and vanished against his skin. Lila noticed but said nothing. She gathered the fallen pills, checked the label, realized the mistake, a hormonal stimulant used for patients recovering from surgery. He must have confused it in the dark. She exhaled, both relieved and afraid of what this meant for him. The silence between them grew dense, filled with things neither knew how to name. Then quietly she said, "You're not broken, Elias. You're just lonely." He looked up sharply, the sound of his first name from her lips almost too intimate. Her eyes held his without flinching. Something flickered there, recognition, empathy. A thread of light in a house made of glass and ghosts. For the first time he didn't hide. He let the shame stay where it was in the past. He let the moment breathe. The thunder faded to rain. His hand, still trembling, rested loosely on his knee, and for a heartbeat he felt the strange ache of being seen. Lila stood, adjusted the lamp, so its light no longer reflected his face in the mirror, and whispered, "I'll be downstairs if you need anything." She turned to leave, but at the door she paused, glanced back once. He sat with his head bowed, a man unmade, yet somehow alive again. Outside, the storm softened into a steady rhythm against the lake, as if the city itself was keeping time with his pulse. Elias did not sleep that night. The medicine's heat faded, but its echo lingered under his skin like static. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her standing in the doorway, hair damp from the rain, eyes steady and unafraid. No one had looked at him like that since before the crash. When dawn came, the lake outside the window was wrapped in fog. He sat at the edge of the bed, still wearing the same shirt, staring at the reflection of the empty room. The knock came softly, like she was afraid to wake something fragile. "Mr. Ward," Lila said from the hall. "I brought tea." He almost told her to leave it outside, but the thought of the hallway being empty again pressed against his ribs. "Come in," he managed. The door opened with a slow sigh. She stepped inside, carrying a porcelain cup, steam curling into the air between them. Her uniform was a neat hair pulled back. Face calm but not indifferent. The light from the window caught the faint shimmer of a tear track she must not have noticed. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Alive," he said, then realized how strange that sounded. She smiled faintly, the kind that forgives rather than judges. "That's a start." He nodded toward the towel she'd used to wipe his face the night before, folded now on the chair. "You didn't have to do that." "If I hadn't," she said quietly, "you'd still be on the floor." Her tone carried no accusation, just truth. He gestured to the cup. "Thank you." As she set it on the table, their eyes met in the mirror's reflection. He saw himself through her gaze, a man who looked human again, not powerful or broken, just real. The air felt charged. "I took the wrong medicine," he said finally, voice hoarse. My body reacted. "I don't even remember what I said." "You said I need to make love," she answered softly. He froze, breath catching. She looked at the floor. "But I knew it wasn't what you meant." Shame crawled up his neck. "I'm sorry. You don't need to apologize to me," she replied. "You were in pain, and that's not an excuse. It's a reason," she said. Her words were simple, but they landed like a verdict. He stared at the cup of tea, steam drifting into his reflection. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I thought I could control everything. My company, my image, even this. He gestured vaguely toward his body as if it were an uncooperative machine. But I couldn't. You're not supposed to control everything she said. You're supposed to feel it. He laughed once bitterly. That's the problem. Feeling doesn't build companies. Feeling ruins them. Maybe, she said, meeting his eyes again. But it also saves people. He studied her face, the calm strength, the tired eyes, the faint scar along her jaw. Were you always this certain? No, she said. I used to believe control was love. It's what I learned taking care of my mother. But love isn't about fixing what's wrong. It's about staying even when it is. The words hit him harder than he expected. You make it sound easy. It isn't, she replied. That's why it matters. He felt the silence between them grow thick again, not uncomfortable, just dense with something unnamed. The rain had stopped. The fog outside made the world look washed clean. Lila turned to leave, but he said, "Wait." She paused at the doorway. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "People will talk." "People always talk," she answered, "but they rarely listen." He almost smiled. "What are you doing here, Lila?" She hesitated. "Making sure you're human?" He blinked. "You think I forgot. I think you forgot what it feels like," she said. "It's not the same thing." He looked down at his hands, the veins standing out against pale skin. "I've spent 3 years avoiding that feeling. Because every time I let it in, I see her." "Your fiancé," she said quietly. "Yes." "Then maybe it's time you saw someone else." He looked up sharply, and for the first time in years, laughter and grief collided in his chest. "You talk like you know what healing is. I know what surviving is," she said. "Healing's just the part that takes longer." Something inside him loosened. He reached for the tea, took a sip, and said, "You should go rest. So should you. I don't remember how." "Then start with breathing." She said, her voice almost a whisper. She moved toward the door again, and for a heartbeat, he thought she might turn back. Instead, she stopped by the mirror, looked at his reflection, and said, "You're not broken, Elias. You're just lonely." The same words she'd said last night, but now they sounded like a truth the house itself could hear. He swallowed hard. "And what about you?" he asked. "Aren't you lonely?" She smiled without looking at him. "Only when I forget to sing." She left then, closing the door quietly behind her. Elias sat in the chair staring at the ripples in his tea until they stilled. The room smelled faintly of jasmine and rain. He picked up the towel she'd folded and ran his fingers over the fabric, still soft, still warm from the night before. In the mirror, his reflection looked back at him, eyes clearer, posture straighter. For the first time in years, he didn't see failure staring back. He saw possibility. Outside, the fog began to lift, revealing a strip of light, breaking through the clouds over Lake Union. It wasn't sunlight yet, but close enough to remember what it might feel like. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the silence settle around him, not as punishment, but as peace. For now that was enough. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like an empty cathedral of glass. Morning light spilled through the tall windows, touching the edges of the marble floor where dust used to settle undisturbed. Elias woke early, not from nightmares, but from a faint melody drifting through the halls. At first he thought he was dreaming. The voice was soft, almost hesitant, carrying a tune that reminded him of warmth. He followed the sound to the lower level, where Lila was cleaning near the piano room. She didn't notice him. Her back was to the window, sunlight brushing her hair into threads of gold. The song was simple, something from another life. He stood in the doorway for a long time before saying, "What song is that?" She jumped, startled. "Oh, sorry, sir. Just something my mother used to hum when she was scared." "Then keep singing," he said, voice quieter now. She looked unsure, but she did. Her tone wrapped around the room like a small mercy. The next morning she brought tea to his study without being asked. She left it by the desk, and when he said thank you, she smiled for the first time, a small, careful smile, but real. In the days that followed, their paths crossed in ways that might have seemed accidental, but weren't. He lingered in rooms longer than necessary. She found reasons to check the thermostat, adjust the curtains, straighten books that didn't need straightening. They both pretended not to notice. The silence between them changed shape. It was no longer heavy. It listened. One evening he found her in the kitchen, staring out at the rain. "You'll never get used to it," he said, leaning against the doorway. "Seattle rain doesn't stop for anyone." "It's fine," she said. "In my hometown we prayed for rain. Where was that El Paso? It rained twice a year, maybe 3 times, if we were lucky." "And you moved here?" he asked. "Not by choice." She smiled faintly, rinsing her hands. "Life sends you where it needs you to be." He nodded, remembering something his therapist once told him before he stopped going. "And what if where you are isn't what you want?" She glanced back at him. "Then maybe it's what someone else needs." The words lingered long after she left the room. That night he found himself walking to the piano. He hadn't touched it since the accident. The keys were cold under his fingers, the surface thinly coated with dust. He pressed one key, C major, the same note she had hummed. It rang out through the quiet house, startling him with its simplicity. Then another, and another. A melody began to take shape, clumsy but honest. Upstairs, Lila paused, her cleaning, listening. She didn't interrupt. The next morning she found him at the piano again. "You play?" she said softly. "Trying to," he replied. "I forgot how." "You can't forget music," she said. "You just stop trusting your hands." He smiled faintly, looking down at his fingers. "These hands used to build things. Now they just tremble." "Maybe they're tired," she said. "Maybe they just need something worth touching again." He froze her words, sinking deep. "Don't look at me like that," he said after a moment. "Like what?" "Like I'm still worth saving." She didn't answer. Instead, she picked up a duster and began to clean the piano lid, giving him space to breathe. He started to play again, slower this time, the sound filling the air between them. By the 3rd week, the household staff had begun to whisper. The CEO was talking to the maid, smiling even. Someone claimed they saw him in the garden, helping her carry a box of herbs. Others dismissed it as nonsense. But Elias didn't care. For the first time since his accident, he felt alive in his own house. Every morning when she entered a room, the walls seemed less like prison glass and more like windows. He noticed small things about her, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when nervous, how she spoke softly to plants, as if they understood, how she paused before leaving a room, as if waiting for him to ask her to stay. He never did, but he wanted to. One evening she found him staring at an unfinished design sketch, his latest medical prototype. "What is it?" she asked. "Something to help people breathe better after trauma," he said. "The irony is I can't seem to breathe myself." She stepped closer, her voice calm. "Maybe you've been holding your breath too long." He looked up. "And do you breathe just fine?" She laughed quietly. "Some days, others I pretend." What makes you keep going? The belief that someone might notice the pretending, she said. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The air between them was charged again, soft but alive. He turned away first, clearing his throat. You should rest. It's late. You should too, she said, walking toward the door. I don't remember how he murmured, echoing what he'd said before. She smiled slightly. Then maybe start with listening. To what? To something other than your thoughts, she said. The rain, maybe. When she left, he stood by the window, watching the drizzle paint in long streaks across the glass. The city lights blurred into gold veins running through darkness. He realized she was right. The rain wasn't noise, it was presence. It was proof that something still moved, still touched the world, even when it hurt. Later that night, when the house was quiet again, he returned to the piano. This time he didn't play alone. Lila was standing outside the door, humming that same melody. He followed her rhythm, and together they built something wordless but true. It wasn't love yet. It was the sound of two lonely people remembering how to stay. The days began to soften around the edges, folding one into another, like pages turning quietly. By midweek, the lake outside reflected the pale spring sky, and the glass walls of the mansion no longer looked like barriers, but mirrors for the world Elias was relearning to see. He invited Lila for tea one afternoon, a gesture so foreign to him that even the words felt borrowed. She hesitated before sitting across from him, unsure whether this was kindness or a test. The china between them glimmered under the sunlight that streamed through the ceiling windows. For the first time, the silence wasn't awkward, it was gentle, full of air. You must think this house is strange, he said, pouring the tea with careful hands. It's beautiful, she answered, but lonely houses have their own sound. You can hear it when people stop laughing inside them. He smiled, a slow and uncertain curve. Then you must hear a lot of silence here. Less now, she said. They talked about small things first, the rain, the lake, the city she was still getting used to. Then the conversation shifted to their pasts like a tide moving inland. She told him about El Paso, about her mother, who used to hum while cleaning to make time pass faster, and about the hospital job she lost when the bills became too much. I came here because I needed a place to stay, she said. But I stayed because I thought maybe the quiet could teach me something. And what has it taught you that quiet isn't peace? She said. It's just waiting for someone to notice the noise inside. Elias looked down at his tea. You sound like my old therapist, he said, half amused, half pained. He quit on me. Maybe he thought you stopped listening. No, Elias said. I stopped wanting to be fixed. Lila tilted her head, watching him carefully. Then start with forgiving yourself for being human. He opened his mouth to protest, but stopped when he saw the look in her eyes, soft knowing, the look of someone who had seen worse pain and didn't run from it. That afternoon changed something. The next day she found him in the music room again, trying to play a melody she recognized from her own humming. His hands moved with hesitation, but there was rhythm now, a heartbeat returning. You remembered, she said from the doorway. I tried, he said. My hands still shake. That's how you know you're alive. He glanced up, smiling faintly. You say that like it's a good thing. It's the best thing, she said. Later that week, she caught him sketching designs at his desk, mechanical drawings of new medical devices. You're working again, she said. It's easier when there's noise in the house, he admitted. You mean me? I mean you're singing, he said. It fills the silence. The way he said it made her heart stumble. No one had ever told her her voice mattered. That night, as she cleaned the window overlooking the lake, she caught his reflection watching her from the hall. He didn't turn away. Their eyes met through the glass, and she smiled small, almost shy. He smiled back. It was the first time she'd seen light in him that wasn't from the city's glow. From that moment, everything seemed to carry new meaning. When she poured his tea, their fingers brushed. When she opened a window, he asked if the air felt better. When she laughed, he looked up from whatever he was doing, as if the sound anchored him. The house staff noticed, of course. They whispered but softly, because even gossip seemed out of place in a home learning to breathe again. One evening she walked past his office and saw him sitting by the piano, his face illuminated by the warm gold of the lamp. "Don't look at me like that," he said without turning. Like what she asked, like I'm still worth saving. She stepped closer, her reflection merging with his in the window's glass. "Maybe you already saved yourself," she said. "I just reminded you where the light switch was." He chuckled quietly, and for a brief second she caught the man he might have been, before everything fell apart, the one who built empires and laughed easily. "Lila," he said softly, as if testing how her name felt in the air. "Thank you. For what?" "For not treating me like a patient," he said. "For not treating me like a paycheck," she replied. Outside the rain began again, steady and light, wrapping the house in its steady rhythm. She watched him place his hands on the piano keys, the trembling almost gone now, and play a few fragile notes. "It's not perfect," he said. "Neither am I," she answered. The look they shared across that grand piano felt like a contract signed without words. That night, when she returned to her room, she couldn't sleep. The echo of his music followed her gentle and haunting. She sat by her own window, watching the reflections of city lights ripple across the lake. Somewhere below, she imagined him doing the same. Two strangers bound by silence, now learning how to fill it. It wasn't love yet. It was recognition, the kind that makes the world seem less cruel, the kind that begins with a single smile behind the glass. The rain returned that night harder than before, turning the lake into a mirror of silver and shadow. Elias couldn't sleep. The storm pressed against the windows, echoing inside his chest. He sat by the fire in the study, the flicker of light tracing over his hands, his thoughts a restless tide. On the desk lay an old photograph, him and a woman, with laughing eyes taken years before. He hadn't looked at it in months. He should have thrown it away, but he couldn't. The door creaked softly behind him. "You're still awake," Lila said. Her voice was a whisper against the thunder. She stood in the doorway, her robe tied loosely, hair falling over one shoulder. He didn't turn. "The rain's too loud," he said, "or maybe it's just my head. Would you like some tea?" "Stay," he said before he could stop himself. She hesitated, then stepped into the room. The light painted her face in shades of gold and shadow. "You shouldn't be alone during storms," she said. "That's what my mother used to say. Your mother sounds wise." "She was," she said softly. "She taught me that fear gets smaller when you share it." He looked at her for a long moment. "I haven't shared anything real with anyone in years. Then maybe start now." He inhaled slowly, the words catching in his throat. "I was engaged once." She nodded, as if she'd known, but waited for him to continue. "Her name was Elise. We met in medical school. She believed in everything me, the work, the future. We were driving back from a charity event the night it happened. It was raining then, too." He paused, staring into the fire. I was tired. I shouldn't have been driving. The truck came out of nowhere. She didn't make it. I did. Lila's eyes softened. It wasn't your fault. It was my car, my decision, my hands on the wheel. My body walked away when hers didn't. Tell me how that isn't my fault. Because punishment doesn't equal love, she said. You've been punishing yourself for surviving. Maybe I deserve to, he said quietly. Since that night, my body stopped responding to touch, to desire, to everything. He looked up at her, his voice breaking. It's not that I can't, it's that I don't deserve to. The rain hammered against the glass like applause for his confession. Lila stepped closer, her shadow merging with his. Pain isn't punishment, Elias. It's just pain. It only becomes punishment when you refuse to let it go. He shook his head. You make it sound easy. It's not, she said. But neither is dying inside your own house. He let out a shaky breath that might have been a laugh. I thought I could bury it under work, under money. But I still wake up hearing her scream. That's not the past, she said. That's memory pretending to be love. Her words hit him like truth he'd been avoiding. He turned toward her fully, now eyes red. How do you do it? He asked. How do you still believe in people? Because if I don't, she said, I'll become like the world that hurt me. For a moment they just looked at each other, the billionaire and the woman who cleaned his rooms. Two people stripped of everything but the honesty between them. The storm outside flared, lightning flooding the room with white light. Lila didn't flinch. You don't need to fix yourself, she said. You just need to let someone hold what's broken until it stops bleeding. He swallowed hard tears, gathering but not falling. I wouldn't know where to start. She took one step closer, close enough for him to feel her warmth. Then start here, she whispered, and reached out, placing her hand gently over his chest. His breath caught. Beneath her palm, his heartbeat stumbled and then steadied. There she said softly, "That's the sound of being alive." He closed his eyes, the firelight flickering through his lashes. "You shouldn't touch me," he said. "Why?" "Because it makes me remember what I lost. Then maybe it's time to remember what you still have." Her voice was steady, her hand unmoving. The silence between them thickened, full of everything neither dared to name. "Lila," he whispered, his voice barely a sound. "If I tell you something, promise, you won't look away." "I won't," she said. "I need to feel again," he said, "but not the way I used to. I want to feel something that doesn't hurt." Her eyes shimmered. "You just did," she said. "It's called hope." He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, and when she finally withdrew her hand, the warmth lingered long after. "You should rest," she said, stepping back toward the door. "And you?" he asked. "I'll listen to the rain," she said. He smiled faintly. "Then I'll listen too." She hesitated, then looked at him one last time. "You're not alone, Elias. Not anymore." When she was gone, the storm outside seemed softer, almost like a lullaby. He leaned back in the chair, his chest still warm where her hand had been. For the first time since the accident, he didn't feel like a man trapped in memory. He felt like someone waiting for morning. The house slept under a sky bruised with thunder, the lake below restless with reflected lightning. Elias lay awake, drenched in sweat, his breath uneven. The air felt too heavy, the sheets too warm. He had taken another dose of his medication hours ago, the right one this time, or so he thought. But the reaction came again, fiercer, a tremor that started in his chest and spread through his limbs. His pulse raced like a trapped bird. He sat up dizzy, gripping the headboard for balance. The world swayed. He tried to call out for help, but his voice broke into a whisper. The storm outside answered instead. In the hallway, Lila was closing the kitchen windows when she heard something a thud, faint but urgent. She hurried upstairs, her robe brushing the walls, and knocked. Mr. Ward. No reply. Elias. She pushed the door open. The lamp by the bed flickered, casting the room in alternating shadow and light. He was sitting there, trembling, his face pale and eyes glassy. "Lila," he rasped, barely breathing. "I think I took the wrong medicine again." She rushed to his side, heart pounding. "How many? Just one," he whispered, clutching the blanket. "But it's happening again. My heart, it's too fast." She steadied him, pressing her fingers to his wrist. His pulse hammered beneath her touch, wild but steady enough to hold. "You're okay," she said softly. "You're not dying. You're just feeling too much." His hand found hers, gripping tightly, desperate. "Lila," he said again, voice raw, "please don't go." "I'm not going anywhere," she said, pulling the blanket over his shaking shoulders. "You're having a reaction. Just breathe through it." "I can't," he said, shaking his head, eyes glistening with tears. "I can't breathe. I can't stop thinking." "About what?" she asked gently. "About her." He shook his head slowly. "About you." The storm flashed white across the window, illuminating the confusion and honesty in his face. "I don't understand," she said, but she did. He squeezed her hand harder, words trembling out of him like confession. "Lila, I need to make love. Don't move." The words came out almost identical to the first night, but this time they weren't a mistake. They were a plea, trembling, reverent. She froze, heart hammering, knowing exactly what he meant. He wasn't asking for touch or desire. He was begging for permission to feel alive. She stayed still, eyes locked on his, and whispered, "You already are." His breathing slowed a little, then hitched again. "You don't understand," he said, voice shaking. "It's like my body is begging for something it can't have." "It can," she said softly, "just not the way you think." She placed her hand over his, her palm cool against his fevered skin. "Let it move through you. You're safe." He closed his eyes, tears slipping down his temples. "I feel like I'm breaking," he whispered. "Then break," she said. "You can't rebuild if you never fall apart." Lightning filled the room again, tracing their silhouettes against the wall. She could feel his hand trembling beneath hers, every breath, a battle between pain and release. He opened his eyes, the blue of them wet and wild. "You should leave," he said, trembling harder. "You shouldn't see me like this." "I've seen worse," she said. "You think pain makes you ugly. It doesn't. It makes you real. You don't have to stay." "I know," she whispered. "That's why I am." Something in him broke, then not his body, but the armor he'd worn for years. His shoulders collapsed, his voice cracking open. "I thought I forgot how to feel. But you." He stopped, unable to finish. She leaned closer, her voice barely above the rain. "You don't need to say it. Just breathe." For a long time, that was all they did. Her hand on his breath sinking slowly with hers, the thunder rolling away into distance. When the worst of the tremor passed, he looked at her with something like disbelief. "You stayed," he said softly. "Of course I did." "Why?" "Because everyone else left when you stopped pretending to be fine," she said. "But you were never the problem, Elias. You were just tired." His eyes filled again, but this time the tears didn't burn, they healed. He closed them, letting her words sink in, each one a stitch in the unraveling fabric of his soul. The air between them shifted, the fever broke, his breathing steadied. She adjusted the blanket around him, her fingers brushing his hair back from his forehead. "You're safe now," she murmured. "Just rest." He caught her wrist gently. "Don't go yet," he said, barely a whisper. "I can't sleep alone tonight." "You won't," she said, sitting beside him until his eyes grew heavy. When his breathing evened out, she stayed watching the rise and fall of his chest. Outside, the storm thinned into a quiet drizzle, the sound of water against glass sobbed his breath. She whispered into the dim room, "You're not broken, Elias. You just needed someone to stay." In his sleep, his fingers twitched, reaching for hers, and when their hands met again, his grip was calm, this time not desperate. The clock ticked quietly, no longer an enemy, but a rhythm that matched his heart. The lake outside shimmered faintly with the reflection of dawn. For the first time in years, the house wasn't haunted, it was alive. And though she didn't know it yet, the world beyond those windows was already waiting to misunderstand what had happened in this room. But for now there was only peace. The storm had passed, but the damage it left behind was only beginning. Morning light crept across the mansion, exposing the quiet aftermath of a night too fragile to be explained. Lila left Elias's room just before sunrise, careful not to wake him, her heart pounding with confusion and something close to peace. She had stayed beside him until he fell asleep, his hand loosely wrapped around hers. And though nothing had happened in the way the world might imagine, she knew what it would look like if anyone saw. Downstairs, a security guard named Ron was reviewing the night footage. He wasn't supposed to, but curiosity was a disease in houses like this. When he replayed the clip from the upstairs corridor, he saw her entering the master suite at 2:43 a.m. and not leaving until dawn. There was no audio, but later, another file appeared, an internal mic that had accidentally captured a fragment of sound. A trembling male voice saying, "I need to make love. Don't move." The words echoed in the empty security office like an accusation. By noon, whispers had begun to spread through the household staff. By evening, one of them had shared the clip with someone outside. Within 24 hours, it had found its way to the internet. Tech billionaire caught whispering to his maid, read the first headline. Then came the hashtags, billionaire scandal, Me Too Tech, power and consent. The story exploded across every platform and stripped of context fed to millions hungry for outrage. By the next morning, news vans were lined up outside the gate. Elias woke to the sound of them, confused, then horrified when his assistant called. "It's everywhere," she said. "The board wants a statement." He stared at the phone, the blood draining from his face. Upstairs, Lila was folding laundry when she heard the first report on TV. She froze as her own name flashed on the screen, blurred but unmistakable. Her body went cold. Within an hour, HR from the company arrived with two men in suits. They spoke in careful legal tones. "Ms. Moreno, we need you to sign this non-disclosure agreement," one of them said. "It's for your protection as well as Mr. Ward's." She read the paper, the language sterile and sharp. "You're asking me to lie," she said quietly. "To say nothing happened," the man corrected. "Nothing did," she said. "Then signing shouldn't be difficult." Elias rolled into the room, then pale and furious. "She's not signing anything," he said. "Get out." The men exchanged looks but obeyed, muttering about protocols as they left. When the door closed, Lila turned to him. "You shouldn't have done that. They're trying to silence you. They're trying to save you," she said. "Don't you see the world doesn't care about truth? They care about spectacle." He clenched his fists on the wheels of his chair. I won't let them destroy you for helping me. Elias, she said softly, you can't fight gossip with anger. It only makes the fire bigger. Then what do I do? Let them call you what they're calling you. If it protects what you've built, yes. His voice cracked. You think any of this matters without you? Don't make it worse, she said, her voice trembling now. You've already been through enough. Let me leave before it costs you everything. He shook his head violently. No, you saved me. That's exactly why I have to disappear, she said, tears in her eyes. If I stay, I'll turn your healing into a headline. The phone kept buzzing in his hand. Reporters, lawyers, friends who didn't know how to sound like friends. Outside, the sound of camera shutters cut through the morning air. Lila packed her small suitcase in silence. When she turned to face him, his expression was raw, childlike. Don't go, he whispered. Please, if I stay, you'll lose everything, she said. If you leave, I'll lose the only thing that mattered, he replied. For a moment they stood there, two lives balanced on the edge of ruin. Then she placed her hand on his cheek, gentle but final. You taught me that being seen doesn't always mean being safe, she said. Now let me protect you the only way I can. He caught her wrist, desperate. Lila, no Elias. Her voice was steady now. This is the part where you live. When she walked away, he didn't stop her. Couldn't. The flashbulbs from outside strobed through the window, painting the walls in false light. He sat there, still holding the air where her hand had been, while downstairs the front door closed with a sound that felt like the end of everything. That night, the news anchors debated. His guilt, social media demanded his apology, and strangers built narratives from fragments they didn't understand. He watched one of the reports in silence, the screen flickering across his hollow face. Tech hero or hidden predator, a reporter asked. A tragic fall from grace. He turned off the television and stared at his reflection in the dark glass. For the first time, he understood how fast the world could destroy something it never cared to understand. The rain began again outside, tapping against the window like fingers asking for entry. He whispered to no one, "You saved me, and now I can't even save you." In the next room, the piano sat silent, waiting for hands that no longer knew how to play. The scandal had begun, and with it, the unraveling of everything that had once felt like redemption. The house was quiet again, but not the kind of quiet that brought peace. It was the hollow silence that comes after everything collapses. Lila's room stood empty, her uniform folded neatly on the bed. Elias wheeled himself to the doorway and stared at it like it was an open grave. The sound of distant camera shutters still lingered in his head, even though the reporters were gone now, bored with yesterday's scandal. The board had suspended him indefinitely. Investors fled. His phone lit up with messages he couldn't bear to read. "We stand with survivors," one headline said, and his stomach turned, because the survivor they meant was her, not him. But what they didn't understand was that he wasn't the monster. In the story, they had both been broken, and for one brief moment, they had made each other whole. Now she was gone, and the mansion felt colder than it had ever been. He tried to work to write statements to prove his innocence, but every attempt came out sounding defensive, hollow. He deleted them all. On the third day, he returned to the piano. The keys were dusted but untouched. He pressed one note, the same one she used to hum, and the sound cracked under the weight of his hands. He pressed it again, harder, until the tone turned sharp. He leaned forward, forehead against the keys, and whispered her name. The sound didn't echo. The air just swallowed it. At night, he wheeled himself through the house. Every hallway, a corridor of ghosts. He could still smell her soap and Jasmine, a trace of warmth that refused to fade. The staff avoided him now. Even those who had once admired him looked away. In the papers, he was a cautionary tale, the fall of Elias Ward. They called him reckless, arrogant, manipulative. He didn't fight it. Maybe they were right. Maybe believing he could be seen was the real mistake. On the 5th night after her departure, the wind from the lake howled against the windows, like a voice trying to speak through glass. He left the lights off and watched the storm from the piano bench. The reflection in the window stared back at him, a man unrecognizable, all edges and shadows. His empire was still standing, but inside he was rubble. A message notification blinked on his phone. It was his lawyer. Settle quietly. Admit to inappropriate conduct. Save what's left. He laughed bitter and low. Save what's left, he thought, when everything worth saving had already walked away. The next morning he rolled himself to the media room, where the old security monitors still flickered with gray light. He replayed the footage from that night, her entering the room, the soft closing of the door, his voice whispering words. Torn from desperation, not desire. I need to make love. Don't move. Out of context, it sounded damning. In truth, it was holy. But the world didn't care about truth. He sat back, pressing a hand against his face, and realized he hadn't eaten in days. His reflection in the monitor looked like a stranger, unshaven, hollow-eyed, a ghost, haunting his own success. He shut the screens off and turned toward the window, where the lake shimmered under dull morning light. For the first time in months, he thought of walking again, not physically, but towards something beyond the walls that had trapped him. But there was nowhere to go. Without her, the world outside seemed as meaningless as the wealth he still technically possessed. That evening he played again. This time the melody came slow and uneven, a prayer disguised as sound. The security camera in the corner blinked red, still recording, capturing a man stripped of dignity but clinging to something purer than survival. He looked up at it, suddenly eyes burning. If this is what love costs, he whispered, I'd pay it again. His voice cracked on the last word. He closed his eyes, letting the tears fall freely. It felt strange to cry without hiding. The storm had passed outside, but inside him it still raged. Later, when the staff returned to clean the study, they found him asleep by the piano, the final chord still pressed under his trembling hand. They whispered among themselves. Some said he'd lost his mind, others that he was repenting. But the truth was simpler. He wasn't breaking down. He was surrendering. The mansion no longer looked powerful. It looked hollow, stripped of its illusions. The mirrors reflected not wealth but loneliness multiplied. In one of them, Elias caught sight of himself and didn't turn away. For once, he faced what he had become, a man who built machines to fix broken hearts and couldn't fix his own. He almost smiled at the irony. Somewhere in the city, he imagined Lila standing under the same gray sky, maybe humming again, maybe still praying for him. The thought didn't hurt as much as it used to. It just ached quiet and constant, like the sound of rain that never fully stops. By the end of the week, the board released a statement announcing his resignation. The story had already begun to fade, from headlines replaced by the next scandal. He watched it all unfold from his empty living room, the television light flickering across his face. He turned it off and listened to the silence that followed. It didn't frighten him anymore. He wheeled himself to the window, the city lights reflected like tears on the glass. For a moment he almost saw her there smiling faintly, whispering that he wasn't broken. He whispered back to the reflection, "I'm still here." Outside the lake shimmered under a sliver of moonlight, and for the first time since she left, the sound of his own breathing didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a promise. The mansion felt quieter with each passing day, until silence became its only occupant. Elias had stopped opening the blinds, stopped answering calls, stopped pretending. The world had moved on without him, but inside the house, time stood still. One gray morning, a knock echoed through the hallway. The mail had come dropped at the doorstep by a courier who didn't wait for signatures anymore. Bill's letters from lawyers' donation requests. He tossed them aside until one envelope caught his eye, plain white. No return address, the handwriting delicate and familiar. His chest tightened. He tore it open, and a faint scent of lavender escaped the scent of her. He read slowly, his eyes tracing each line like a prayer. "Dear Elias, I didn't leave because I was ashamed of you. I left because the world was. I wanted to protect you from their noise, from their cruelty. But I can't protect your loneliness. You once told me you couldn't feel your body anymore. I think I understand now. It was your heart that had gone numb. Mine has been beating too hard ever since. Please live for both of us. Love, Lila." The words blurred as his vision swam. He set the letter down, hands trembling. For the first time since the scandal, he spoke her name out loud. Lila. It came out like a breath, fragile and alive. He looked around the empty room as though she might appear. Outside, the lake reflected a dull gray sky, its surface rippling in the wind. He sat there for a long time, the letter resting on his lap, his heartbeat sinking with the rhythm of the rain. "If she loved me enough to leave," he murmured, "I'll love her enough to find her." That sentence became his anchor. He called his assistant, who answered in shock. "Sir, are you all right?" "I'm not," he said, "but I'm done being wrong." He canceled the legal settlements, shut down his private office, and sold one of his cars. He started showing up at the company headquarters, not as a CEO, but as a man asking for forgiveness. When the board saw him thinner but steadier, they didn't recognize the calm in his voice. "I built this company to heal bodies," he said at a shareholder meeting. "But I never learned to heal myself. I hurt someone who never hurt me, simply by letting the world define her worth. They expected a press defense. Instead, they got honesty. The media picked up the story again, but this time the headlines were different. Disgraced CEO admits guilt not for scandal, but for silence. His inbox filled with messages not of outrage, but empathy. Men wrote to say they too had suffered in silence, ashamed of their fragility. Women wrote about being misjudged by a world addicted to spectacle. And somewhere in all that noise, he began to hear a new kind of sound understanding. He returned to the lake house a few days later and sat by the piano again, the letter still tucked in his breast pocket. He touched the keys lightly, playing the melody she used to hum. It was still broken, uneven, but it carried something new, hope. When he finished, he looked at the mirror across the room. The man staring back wasn't a headline or a CEO or a scandal. He was just Elias Ward, human and humbled. That night, he opened his laptop and searched every clinic registry in Washington state. He knew her background: nursing, community work, faith in second chances. He narrowed it down to health programs, women's shelters, community centers. For hours he scrolled through websites until one caught his breath: Tacoma-Free Clinic, Healing the Invisible. The mission statement read, "Because not every wound can be seen." The founder's name was listed at the bottom, El Moreno. His heart stumbled. He stared at the screen for a long time, afraid to hope, then whispered, "You didn't disappear. You transformed." The next morning, he packed a small bag and drove toward Tacoma. The rain followed him gentle now, more like a companion than a curse. He stopped once at a roadside diner, his hands shaking as he sipped coffee, wondering what he'd say if he found her. Every sentence he rehearsed felt too small. When he arrived at the clinic, it was late afternoon. The building was modest, painted white sunlight, falling across the sign with her name etched beneath. Through the window, he saw children drawing on paper volunteers, moving quietly through the hall. Then he saw her Leila bent over a table, helping a young boy hold a paintbrush. She looked peaceful, whole. He didn't go in, not yet. He just stood outside, hand over the letter in his pocket, and whispered, "You kept your promise. Now it's my turn." That evening, as the sun set over the bay, he sat in his car and began to write his own letter. "Dear Lila, you once said I should start with my own heart. I didn't understand then, but I do now. I am not coming to take you back. I'm coming to thank you for leaving me enough space to find myself. You saved my life by refusing to let me use you as my cure. If you still believe in second chances, I'd like to meet you not as your employer, not as your patient, but as a man who finally learned to breathe." He folded the letter and left it in her mailbox. As he drove away, the last light of the day reflected on the lake, turning the water gold. For the first time, he didn't feel haunted. He felt guided. The news cycle turned again, but this time Elias controlled the story. 2 weeks after sending his letter, he appeared unannounced at a tech ethics conference in downtown Seattle, where the press had gathered, expecting the usual polished speeches about innovation and growth. When the cameras turned to him, he didn't walk onto the stage in a tailored suit, but rolled forward in his wheelchair, wearing a plain gray shirt and no tie. The room fell silent. "I know most of you came to talk about progress," he began, voice steady, but raw. "But progress means nothing if we keep confusing silence with integrity. I'm the man you saw on those headlines. Yes, I whispered those words. I said, 'I need to make love, don't move.' And I'm not here to deny it. I'm here to tell you why." The murmurs spread like ripples. He paused to let them settle. That night, I wasn't speaking to a woman as an object. I was speaking as a man who had forgotten he was human. I was asking for something no machine could give: connection, compassion, life, and the woman the world. Tried to shame for hearing me, she gave me exactly that. The room was still, except for the clicking of cameras. "The truth is," he continued, "I wasn't the powerful one. She was, because she stayed, because she listened, because she reminded me that strength isn't control, it's surrender." A few people stood up, unsure whether to applaud or stay silent. Elias pressed on. "I've stepped down from my company, I've sold my shares. And today I'm launching the HeartSight Foundation. Its purpose is simple: to help men like me, those who hide behind money, medicine, and shame, learn that healing begins where ego ends." The speech lasted only 7 minutes, but within hours it was everywhere. Clips flooded social media. Comment sections filled with unexpected compassion. "Healing, not scandal," trended for the first time. People weren't mocking him anymore. They were talking about loneliness, mental health, masculinity, redemption. News anchors called it one of the most honest statements from a corporate leader in a decade. Late-night hosts, usually merciless, played his clip without irony. A woman in the audience who had once worked under him posted a photo with the caption, "He didn't defend himself, he apologized for all of us." The foundation's website crashed from traffic within a day. Thousands of men signed up for support groups, therapy sponsorships, outreach programs. Elias watched it unfold from his small office, overlooking the city, not with pride but disbelief. For the first time, his name wasn't attached to scandal, but to change. Still, he felt something missing. Redemption meant little if it didn't reach the person who had made it possible. He sent a public message through an interview with a local paper. When asked if he wanted forgiveness, he said, "Forgiveness isn't mine to ask for. But if the woman who taught me to see again is reading this, I want her to know she wasn't my mistake. She was my cure." The line spread like wildfire. Every news outlet quoted it. It was printed on magazine covers and reshared with millions of hearts. Somewhere in Tacoma, Lila saw it too. She stood by the clinic window, holding the paper, her throat-tight eyes shining. The world had changed its tune. The scandal that once hunted her now spoke her truth louder than she ever could. At the foundation's opening event a month later, Elias stood before a smaller crowd, survivors, therapists, veterans, people forgotten by systems. "We are not machines," he told them. "We are stories still being written." He unveiled the foundation's slogan, "Feel to Heal." The same words Lila had once told him in his darkest hour. The reporters wrote about transformation, about vulnerability, becoming strength. But none of it mattered to Elias as much as the empty chair in the back row that stayed unclaimed. He looked at it often, hoping she might walk in. She never did. Yet something in him knew she had heard him. That evening, alone in his office, he watched the sunset over Puget Sound. The light spilled across the water, golden and alive. He opened the window, breathing in the salt air, and for the first time in years, his chest didn't ache. He whispered to the horizon, "You were right. Healing takes longer, but it happens." His phone buzzed an email notification from the foundation's public inbox. No subject line, just a message. "Keep helping them. That's how you'll find me." There was no signature, but he didn't need one. He smiled, eyes burning, the kind of smile that felt like survival. Outside, the lights of Seattle flickered on one by one, reflections dancing across the glass. The man the world had condemned was now being reborn in plain sight, not because he fought back, but because he finally told the truth. Redemption wasn't about clearing his name. It was about earning peace. And as he looked out at the city that had once only seen his fall, Elias Ward finally understood some stories aren't meant to be defended. They're meant to be lived differently the second time around. The HeartSight Foundation had been running for 6 months when Elias received a handwritten note forwarded from the Tacoma branch. It was brief. "You once told me you wanted to build something that helped people feel human again. You already did. L." There was no address, but the postmark was from Tacoma. That night, he sat awake by the window, overlooking the lake, the moon slicing through the clouds like a soft blade. He knew she was close, and for the first time, he allowed himself to believe he deserved to find her. The next morning, he canceled all his meetings and drove south. The road curved along the water-silver light, rippling across the windshield. He hadn't been to Tacoma since the search that ended in silence, but now something in his chest guided him like a compass. The foundation had recently donated to a small community health fair near the bay, and when he arrived, the place buzzed with quiet energy. Children chased bubbles, volunteers handed out food, and a band played soft jazz from a portable speaker. He walked no wheelchair this time, only a cane. Physical therapy and time had done their work, but so had forgiveness. He moved slowly through the crowd until he saw her. Lila stood near a tent with a canvas sign that read, "Art for Healing." She was helping a group of children dip their brushes in paint, their laughter carrying through the salt air. Her hair was tied back. Her sleeves rolled her face, lit by sunlight. She looked peaceful, more real than memory. For a long moment, he just watched her, unsure if the trembling in his hands was fear or gratitude. Then she turned and saw him. Her breath caught her brush slipping from her fingers. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The noise of the fair faded into a single long silence. Then she whispered Elias. He nodded once, a voice low. "Hi, Lila." She wiped her hands on a cloth, still trembling. "You shouldn't have come." "I had to," he said, taking a careful step closer. "I lost everything, but I found myself, and I needed you to know that the man you saved didn't vanish. He learned to stand." Her eyes glistened, a thousand unspoken things caught between them. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "That's where you're wrong." He moved closer, holding her gaze. "You weren't my mistake, Lila. You were my cure." The words hung between them like a vow. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. Around them life went on, children laughing, paint dripping, the wind carrying the scent of salt and rain. He reached out his hand, hesitant, open. "May I?" She stared at it for a long second, then placed her own hand in his. It fit as if the months apart had only been a pause, not an ending. He knelt then, not to propose, not to beg, but to bring himself level with her eyes. "I don't want to make you a symbol again," he said softly. "I just want to see the woman who made me believe in grace." Her lip trembled. "Elias, the world hasn't forgotten. There are still people who let them talk," he interrupted gently. "They already told our story wrong once. Let's tell it right this time." She laughed through her tears, the sound trembling but bright. "You always had a way with words." "Only the ones you taught me," he replied. The sunlight broke through the clouds, then a beam of gold, falling over them like a silent blessing. She looked around at the children, then back at him. "I built this place because of you," she admitted. "Not to hide, but to keep healing alive. I wanted to turn what hurt us into something that helps others." "And you did," he said. "You turned pain into purpose." "We did," she corrected. He rose slowly, his knees unsteady, and she steadied him with a hand on his arm. They stood there like that for a moment, the world softening around them. A volunteer nearby snapped a candid photo, two figures standing amid laughter and color, the past quietly forgiven. He didn't notice. All he saw was her. "Come back to the lake house," he said after a moment. "It doesn't feel like home without you. I can't live in a place that still remembers who I was," she said. "Then let's build one that remembers who we are," he replied. Her silence was an answer in itself. She smiled, small and real. "You never stopped believing, did you?" "You taught me how," he said simply. The fair ended at sunset, but neither of them moved until the last light had melted into the water. As they walked toward the car, their shadows stretched long across the pavement, merging until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. At the edge of the lot, she paused. "Elias, yes. You can drive me home," she said, "but this time no more wrong turns." He smiled. No more wrong medicine either. She laughed, and the sound carried over the bay like a promise kept. When they reached the car, she slipped into the passenger seat. He started the engine, and the radio came to life with a soft piano melody, the same one he used to play in the dark. She turned to him, surprised. "You still play?" "Every night," he said. "It's how I talk to you when I can't find the words." She looked out the window, tears glistening in the fading light. "Then you never stopped talking, and you never stopped listening." The drive back was quiet, filled with the kind of silence that only exists between people who have nothing left to prove. When they reached the lake house, he parked but didn't move. She looked at the house, its windows glowing softly against the night. "It looks different," she said. "Because it finally feels alive," he replied. And when she turned to him, smiling through tears, he realized that every road, every mistake, every word had led him back to this one look, one breath, one moment of peace. 2 years later, the world had changed again, but this time Elias and Lila stood outside the noise instead of inside it. The lake house that once echoed with loneliness now breathed with life. The piano sat near the window, sunlight touching its surface like forgiveness. Elias moved easily, now his limp barely noticeable. Lila sat on the porch steps, dirt on her hands, laughter in her eyes. "You finally learned to touch the earth," she teased, watching him struggle, "to plant a sapling near the water's edge." He looked up at her, smiling. "Because you taught me not to be afraid of feeling." Their foundation had expanded across the country, HeartSight chapters in every major city programs. For men and women who had been silenced by shame, yet their home remained small, intentionally quiet. Every morning they brewed coffee together, every evening they took long walks along the lake. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. They didn't need to. Healing had replaced conversation. One afternoon, a journalist from a human interest magazine visited to write a follow-up story. She asked, "Do you regret how it all began?" Elias thought for a long moment before answering. "Pain doesn't erase beauty," he said. "Sometimes it's the only way we notice it." Lila smiled beside him, her hand resting lightly on his. The journalist looked around the house. No signs of luxury, just warmth. "The world thought your story ended in scandal," she said. Lila replied softly. "They mistook a wound for a crime. When the article was published, the headline read," he said, "I need to make love." And he did. Just not the way the world thought. It went viral, not for shock, but for hope. People shared it with captions like proof that love can heal anything, and a story the internet finally got right. Letters poured in from readers across the country, veterans, widows, broken-hearted people who had believed their bodies and souls were beyond repair. Many ended their notes the same way. "Thank you for reminding us we're still human." Elias and Lila read everyone together by the fireplace. Sometimes they cried, sometimes they just held hands in silence. One evening rain began to fall soft and steady, the same kind that had once sealed their fate. They stood by the window, watching droplets trail down the glass. "Funny," she said. "It all began with rain, and wrong medicine," he added. She laughed. "Guess it wasn't so wrong after all." He turned to her, eyes shining. No, it was the cure in disguise. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "We were the cure, Elias, you and me." Years passed quietly. The lake house filled with small sounds, music, laughter, the creak of old wood. On the piano, a framed newspaper clipping sat beside a photo of them, planting that first tree. In the background of the picture, the lake reflected golden light. Below it, etched into the frame, were 5 words: love that heals shame itself. On the anniversary of the Foundation's creation, they hosted a gathering of former patients and volunteers. Among them was a man who once confessed that hearing Elias's story had stopped him from ending his life. He stood before them now, tears in his eyes, saying, "You gave us permission to feel again." After the crowd left, Lila found Elias on the porch, staring at the stars. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "How strange it is that the world forgave me after I stopped asking for forgiveness." "Because you showed them the truth," she said. "That love doesn't erase our scars. It teaches us how to live with them." He reached for her hand. "You're still the bravest person I know." "No," she whispered. "I just didn't run from what scared me most." "What was that?" he asked. "You," she said, smiling through tears. "And everything you made me feel." They stayed there until dawn, the horizon bleeding pink over the water. The sapling they had planted years ago now stood tall beside the porch, its branches reflected in the still lake. Lila touched its bark and whispered, "See, it grew." "So did we." Elias said. He wrapped an arm around her, his touch steady and sure. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and earth. The world kept moving, but for them time had slowed to a peace they'd both fought hard to earn. As the light rose higher, Elias's voice broke the quiet one last time. "In a world obsessed with power, I found grace. And you," he looked at her, smiling softly. "You found a home in a heart once too scared to beat." She rested her forehead against his. "Then let's keep it beating." The screen would fade to black there if their story were a film. The final image. A slow pan over the lake, the tree, the porch, and 2 silhouettes wrapped in morning light. But their real ending wasn't cinematic, it was human. The house by the lake remained a place where people still came to talk, cry, or simply sit in silence. And sometimes on quiet nights, visitors swore they could hear faint piano notes drifting through the open windows, soft, imperfect, alive. Before you scroll away, take a breath. If this story touched something quiet inside you, the loneliness, the shame, the part that still believes in healing, don't just let it fade. Stories like this are not just fiction, they're mirrors. They remind us that broken doesn't mean unworthy, that silence doesn't mean peace, and that sometimes the only medicine is another human being who sees you. If you've ever been Elias, the one who hides behind work, pride, or pain, remember that it's okay to reach out. You don't have to be powerful to be loved. And if you've ever been Lila, the one who listens, who gives without asking, know that you deserve the same tenderness you offer others. This isn't a story about wealth or scandal. It's a story about returning to yourself, about learning that real love isn't about ownership or desire. It's about witnessing, seeing the other person not as a fix, but as proof that the heart still works. And maybe, if you're reading this at a quiet hour, that's what you needed to hear tonight. Somewhere out there, someone is learning to breathe again because of you. That's what love does, it ripples. So take this story with you. Share it with someone who's forgotten their worth. Tell them it's not too late. Tell them healing takes time, but it's possible. Leave a comment if you felt something, even if it's just one word: hope. Let us know where you're watching from, because your story matters too. Maybe you're in Seattle, maybe New York, maybe somewhere in the quiet countryside where the rain sounds like a heartbeat. Wherever you are, this space was made for you. And if you believe that love can still be a cure in a world obsessed with power and noise, then stay. Subscribe, follow, come back tomorrow. There will be more stories about grace, forgiveness, second chances, and the people who still choose to feel. Because that's what Emma's Stories was built for, to remind you that we're not alone in the dark, that someone somewhere is whispering back, "Don't move, you're safe now." So if you're ready for the next one, tell me in the comments below. What kind of love do you still believe in?